Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Long before the Black Death cast its long shadow over medieval Europe, another, more ancient pestilence brought the vibrant world of late antiquity to its knees. This was the Justinian Pandemic, a terrifying scourge that swept across the globe in the 6th century CE. For centuries, our only window into this catastrophe was through the dramatic, often apocalyptic accounts of those who survived it. But today, the cutting-edge tools of modern science, from genetics to climate modeling, are allowing us to unmask this ancient killer, revealing its secrets with astonishing clarity and challenging everything we thought we knew. To understand the devastation, we first have to picture the world it entered. The mid-6th century was the age of Emperor Justinian I, a ruler of immense ambition who dreamt of restoring the faded glory of the Roman Empire. From his capital in Constantinople, a bustling metropolis of perhaps 500,000 people, Justinian's armies were reconquering lost territories in North Africa and Italy. He was a prodigious builder, giving us timeless marvels like the Hagia Sophia. The Byzantine Empire was at its zenith, a vibrant hub of trade, culture, and military might, connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. But this golden age had cracks beneath the surface. Justinian's costly wars and building projects had placed an enormous financial strain on the empire, and nature itself seemed to be turning against them. The historian Procopius of Caesarea, an eyewitness to the tragedy, recorded a period of bizarrely cold weather and a mysterious dimming of the sun. Modern science has confirmed his account, pointing to a massive volcanic eruption around 536 CE that triggered a volcanic winter, leading to crop failures and famine. It was into this world, an empire stretched thin, a populace weakened by hunger, and a climate in turmoil, that the plague made its fateful entrance. Historical sources are remarkably consistent on where it started. Procopius reports that the pestilence first appeared in 541 CE, in the bustling port of Pelusium in Roman Egypt. This city was the crucial hub for the grain trade that fed the entire empire. From there, it spread with terrifying speed. Carried aboard the very ships that transported grain to the capital, the plague likely arrived in Constantinople in the spring of 542 CE, borne by stowaway black rats and the fleas they carried. The impact on the densely populated capital was catastrophic. What began as a few isolated cases soon exploded into an all-consuming epidemic. Our most vivid and harrowing descriptions of the plague come from those who lived through it. Procopius provides a detailed clinical picture of the disease's progression. It began with a sudden fever. Within a day or two, the plague's most distinctive feature would appear: the buboes. These were painful, swollen lymph nodes, typically in the groin, armpits, or behind the ears. From there, the disease could take different paths. Procopius describes how some victims fell into a deep coma, while others were seized by a violent delirium, racked by nightmares and delusions. They were a danger to themselves and others, crying out and throwing themselves from their beds. Many suffered for days before dying, while for others death came almost instantly. Some developed black pustules on their bodies, a sign of what we now know as septicemic plague, where the bacteria multiply in the bloodstream. For those who vomited blood, a symptom of the even deadlier pneumonic plague, death was considered a certainty. The sheer scale of the death toll quickly overwhelmed the fabric of society. At its peak in Constantinople, Procopius claims the death toll reached a staggering 10,000 people per day, though modern scholars believe a figure closer to 5,000 is more realistic. Regardless of the precise number, the city was drowning in its dead. Initially, families tried to bury their own, but the graveyards soon overflowed. In desperation, people began to stuff bodies into the towers of the city walls, pouring quicklime over them to hasten decomposition. When even this wasn't enough, Justinian ordered vast pits to be dug. Eventually, he had bodies loaded onto ships that were pushed out into the Sea of Marmara and set alight. Normal life came to a complete standstill. The church historian John of Ephesus paints a desolate picture of a city in chaos. Houses became tombs for their inhabitants. Servants and masters died together in their bedrooms. Bridal chambers became filled with corpses. The once bustling highways fell silent. Work of all kinds ceased. The city, which relied on imported grain, faced starvation as food transport was disrupted. And through it all, Procopius recounts a ruthless response from a hard-pressed Justinian who, even as the agricultural workforce was being decimated, showed no mercy and continued to demand the annual tax, not just from the living, but also for their deceased neighbors. For centuries, historians could only speculate that the disease described by eyewitnesses was the bubonic plague. The symptoms were a strong match, but definitive proof was missing. That all changed in the 21st century with the advent of paleogenomics, a revolutionary field that allows scientists to study the DNA of ancient organisms. The breakthrough came from the unlikeliest of sources: the dental pulp of 500-year-old skeletons. Teeth, being hard and protected, are an excellent repository for ancient DNA. By drilling into the teeth of individuals buried in 6th century grave sites in Germany and Jordan, scientists were able to isolate and reconstruct the genome of the pathogen that killed them. The results were unequivocal. The culprit behind the Justinian Pandemic was indeed Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death. This genetic detective work, however, revealed a fascinating twist. When scientists compared the genome of the Justinian-era strain with the strain that caused the Black Death 800 years later, they found they were not directly related. The Justinian strain was a distinct lineage that seemingly went extinct, a dead-end branch on the Yersinia pestis family tree. This discovery overturned the long-held assumption that a single, persistent strain of plague was responsible for all 3 major plague pandemics. Instead, it appears that plague has emerged independently from rodent reservoirs into human populations on multiple occasions throughout history. Further genetic analysis has even pointed to the pandemic's likely geographical origin. Modern strains of Yersinia pestis found in the Tian Shan Mountains, a range bordering China, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, are the closest known relatives to the Justinian plague bacterium. This suggests that the pandemic likely originated in Central Asia. It's plausible that the bacterium traveled along ancient trade routes, perhaps carried by marmots and camels, eventually reaching the Red Sea, where it entered the Byzantine trade network via Egypt. While science has definitively identified the killer, a fierce debate now rages among historians about the true scale of the slaughter and its ultimate impact. This debate is broadly split between 2 camps, the maximalists and the revisionists. The traditional maximalist narrative, drawing heavily on the dramatic accounts of Procopius, paints a picture of an apocalypse. This view posits that the plague killed anywhere from 25 to 100 million people over its 2 centuries of recurrence, wiping out between 1/4 of Europe's population. Proponents of this view argue that the plague crippled the Byzantine Empire at a critical moment. The massive depopulation led to severe labor shortages, which caused galloping inflation as surviving workers demanded higher wages. Agriculture was devastated, leading to famine. Tax revenues plummeted, making it impossible for Justinian to fund his military. This, they argue, is why the empire couldn't hold on to its reconquered territories and was vulnerable to later invasions. In essence, they see the plague as a key factor in the collapse of the classical world. In recent years, however, a new school of thought has emerged to challenge this cataclysmic narrative. Led by scholars like Lee Mordecai and Merle Eisenberg, these revisionists argue that the impact of the Justinian plague has been greatly exaggerated. They don't deny the plague happened, or that it caused immense suffering in cities like Constantinople. However, they argue there is little evidence to support the claim of a widespread demographic collapse across the entire Mediterranean world. Their case is built on a range of non-textual evidence that shows continuity rather than a dramatic break. For example, analysis of ancient pollen from lake beds across Europe and the Near East does not show the significant decline in agriculture one would expect if a large portion of the farming population had died. Similarly, they argue that the volume of coinage in circulation and the number of new inscriptions do not show the sharp decline indicative of a societal collapse. They suggest that earlier historians placed too much weight on a small number of dramatic literary sources, which may have been hyperbolic. They believe that while the plague was a horrifying event for those who experienced it, its long-term demographic, economic, and political effects were relatively minor. This debate is far from settled, and it highlights the challenge of interpreting ancient evidence. It shows how new scientific methods can force us to reevaluate long-held historical certainties. So what is the legacy of this ancient killer? Regardless of the precise death toll, the Justinian Pandemic was a watershed moment. It was the first historically documented global pandemic, a terrifying demonstration of how interconnected the world had become. The plague would continue to return in waves for more than 2 centuries, with the last recorded outbreak around 750 CE, leaving a deep psychological scar on the societies it touched. It contributed to a period of economic decline and military weakness that permanently altered the geopolitical landscape of the early medieval world. The empire that emerged from the shadow of the plague was smaller, poorer, and more embattled. The Justinian Pandemic also serves as a powerful and sobering lesson for our modern world. It is a stark reminder of the enduring threat of zoonotic diseases, pathogens that jump from animals to humans, and the speed at which they can spread in an interconnected world. The story of the Justinian Plague is a story of imperial ambition, biological catastrophe, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. It is a chronicle written in the anguished words of its survivors and painstakingly reconstructed from the genetic ghosts left in the bones of its victims. And as we continue to grapple with our own pandemic challenges, the echoes of this ancient pestilence serve as a powerful reminder of the fragile balance between civilization and the microscopic forces of nature that have shaped, and will continue to shape, our world.